The call came on a Tuesday morning in February, right when I was shoveling the last of an overnight snow off my front walk in Barrie. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I almost didn't answer it. My hands were cold. My back was giving me the usual grief it gives a 63-year-old man who spent 30 years working construction, and I was already late for my 9 o'clock coffee that I make every single morning without fail since my wife passed. It was a number I didn't recognize, Toronto area code. "Is this Walter Drummond?" a woman's voice asked. Formal. Careful. "Speaking," I said. "My name is Christine Aldridge. I'm a solicitor with Aldridge and Fenn on Bay Street. I'm calling regarding the estate of Hugh Okafor." I stood there with the snow shovel in my hand and felt the cold go through me in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Hugh, my best friend of 41 years. Dead from pancreatic cancer 7 weeks earlier. 2 days before Christmas. I hadn't spoken his name out loud since the funeral. Couldn't quite do it yet without something tightening in my chest. "Mr. Drummond, Hugh left specific instructions with our firm. He asked that we contact you exactly 8 weeks after his passing, not before. He was very clear about the timing. He said you'd understand why when you came in." I didn't understand. Not then. She gave me an appointment for the following Thursday. I wrote it on the notepad by the kitchen phone the way my generation does, in pencil, neat block letters. Then I stood at the window and watched the snow I'd just shoveled blow back across the walk, and I thought about Hugh. We'd met in 1983 at a job site outside Sudbury. I was swinging a hammer, he was running electrical. We were both 22 years old and had no business being as confident as we were. We argued about hockey the first day. He was a Leafs man, I was Canadiens, and somehow that argument turned into 40 years of friendship. He was the best man at my wedding. I was at the hospital the night his daughter was born. When my wife Eleanor got sick, Hugh drove 4 hours from his place in Oakville every second weekend for 8 months just to sit with me. Didn't ask. Just showed up. That was Hugh. The cancer moved fast. By the time he told anyone, it was already stage 4. He had 9 months from diagnosis to the end, and he spent most of them in reasonable spirits, which was so aggressively Hugh that it almost made it worse. He kept making jokes. He kept asking about my knee. He never once asked me to feel sorry for him. I thought about all of this on the drive down to Toronto. It was a gray Thursday morning, the 400 slick and slow with transport trucks, and I gripped the wheel and tried to figure out what Hugh could possibly have left unsaid. He wasn't the type for unsaid things. He talked to me about death more directly than most people talk about weather. He told me exactly what he wanted done with his workshop tools. He told me he wasn't afraid. So why the 8 weeks? Why the lawyer? Christine Aldridge was a small woman in her 50s, sharp eyes, a firm handshake. She thanked me for coming and got straight to it, which I respected. She set a sealed envelope on the desk in front of me. My name on the front in Hugh's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. He always printed in these slightly lopsided capitals, like a man who learned to write on uneven surfaces, which he basically had. "Hugh asked that you read this privately," she said. "You're welcome to use our conference room. Take as much time as you need." I took the envelope down the hall, sat at a long table by myself. The Toronto skyline was gray and low out the window. I opened it. There were 12 pages inside, handwritten on yellow legal pad paper, dated 3 months before he died. He must have written it when he could still hold a pen steady. By the end, his hands had gone. I started reading and I didn't look up for 20 minutes. "Walter," he wrote. "If you're reading this, then Christine did her job, which means I did mine. I need you to hear something, and I need you to hear it when you're ready, not when you're still raw, which is why I made her wait the 8 weeks. You'll be in a slightly better place by now. I know you. You'll have shoveled a lot of snow and drunk a lot of bad coffee, and you'll be ready. Something is wrong with your daughter's husband." I set the pages down, picked them up again. My daughter, my Claire. 34 years old, a registered nurse, lives in Hamilton with her husband of 6 years. His name is Bryce, an operations manager at a logistics company. Quiet man. Careful. I'd never had an easy feeling around him. But I'd always chalked that up to a father's instinct, the kind that's more about losing your daughter than gaining a son-in-law. Hugh wrote that he'd noticed something 2 years ago at Claire's birthday dinner. Bryce had made an offhand comment about my finances, specifically about the value of my house and what I might eventually do with my RRSP. Hugh said he hadn't thought much of it at the time, but then it happened again at Christmas, and again the following spring when we all gathered at the lake, always casual. Always Bryce redirecting conversation toward my assets when he thought no one was paying close attention. Hugh had been paying close attention. I started asking around, he wrote. I know people, Walt. You know I know people. I had a conversation with a fellow who does financial compliance work. I had another conversation with a woman who used to work in family law. And then I had a conversation with someone in your daughter's building. I won't name her, it's not relevant. Who told me something that I've been sitting with ever since. Bryce has been asking questions about power of attorney, not for Claire. For you. I had to read that sentence 3 times. He'd been making quiet inquiries about how a person obtains power of attorney over an elderly parent, what the process looked like in Ontario, what conditions made it easier to establish. He'd done this at least twice that Hugh's contact knew about, and possibly more. Hugh wrote, I don't know what he's planning. I don't know the timeline, but I know that man's eyes when money comes up. And Walt, I've looked into a lot of people's eyes over 60 years, and I know what I'm seeing. He's not looking at you like a son looks at a father. He's looking at you like something to be managed. My house in Barrie is worth just over $900,000 now. I have an RRSP that Eleanor and I built together over 30 years, a small defined benefit pension from the union, nothing extraordinary by Bay Street standards. Enough, by the standards of a man who started with nothing, to be worth taking from. I drove home from Toronto in a way I can't fully account for. I don't remember the 400. I remember pulling into my driveway and sitting in the truck for a long time with the engine off. Part of me wanted to call Claire immediately. I actually picked up my phone. Then I put it back down. Because Hugh had anticipated this too. He'd written it on page 9. Don't call Claire yet. I know that's the first thing you want to do, but you need to know more before you do. If you go to her with nothing but my letter, Bryce will explain it away, and Claire will be caught in the middle, and you'll have poisoned the well without helping her. You need to know what's actually happening, and then you need to talk to someone who can help you understand your options. He'd included a name, a woman named Audrey Sims, a solicitor in Barrie who specialized in elder law and estate planning. He'd already spoken to her. She was expecting my call. I called her the next morning. Audrey Sims was in her early 40s, direct and calm in a way that made you feel like you were in capable hands without her ever having to say so. She explained the landscape to me carefully. In Ontario, a power of attorney for property is a significant legal instrument. It gives the holder the right to make financial decisions on your behalf, buying, selling, managing assets. It can be granted voluntarily, or it can be pursued through the courts if a person is deemed to lack capacity. The process of establishing incapacity, she said carefully, can be initiated by family members. It requires assessment. It takes time, but it begins with someone raising the concern. I thought about Bryce. His careful manner. The way he'd started coming to family dinners with his iPad, offering to help me with my banking app, asking if I'd thought about simplifying my accounts. I'd thought he was being helpful. I'd been slightly annoyed by it, but I'd thought he was trying. Audrey suggested we look at a few things. She asked me whether I'd signed anything for Bryce or given him access to any of my accounts. I hadn't. She asked if I'd had any conversations with my doctor recently about my mental capacity, any forms, any questionnaires. I hadn't. She asked if Claire had ever mentioned anything about my living situation, whether I was managing well, whether I'd had any accidents or memory lapses she might have mentioned to Bryce. That one landed differently. Because 3 months earlier, I'd slipped on the ice coming out of the grocery store. Nothing serious, bruised my shoulder, was sore for a week. I'd told Claire about it on the phone. I hadn't thought anything of it. It was ice. I'm 63, not 93. Audrey looked at me steadily. These things can be used to build a narrative, she said. I'm not saying they will be. I'm saying you should be aware of what's possible. I drove home and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor and I had eaten 30 years of meals, and I thought about my daughter. My Claire, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder watching hockey night in Canada when she was 7 years old, who called me every Sunday without fail, who had no idea that the man she'd married might be doing quiet research into how to take control of her father's life. Or did she have no idea? That thought came and went. I didn't let it stay long. I knew my daughter, but I needed to be sure. Audrey helped me set several things in motion quietly. I updated my will with her firm. I established a clear, current power of attorney in favor of my nephew in Guelph, a straightforward young man named Craig who works in insurance and whom I trust completely. I put a notation on my financial accounts with my bank and with my investment broker, a flag that meant any changes to signing authority would require additional verification and a cooling-off period. My broker told me this was increasingly common. He said it without judgment, which I appreciated. Then I waited. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of Sunday phone calls with Claire, of me listening for anything unusual in her voice, of me watching my own reactions to her husband's name. I got better at it. I got calmer. The call that changed things came from Craig. Bryce had contacted him. Out of nowhere, on a Thursday evening, a friendly call, asking if Craig had thought about the family situation, about my age, about whether it made sense for someone closer to look after my affairs. Craig had listened politely, and then called me within the hour. He mentioned, Craig said carefully, that you'd seemed confused the last time he saw you. I hadn't been confused. I hadn't been anything. I'd been quiet at dinner because I was thinking about Hugh. I called Audrey the next morning. She said it was time. We went to the police together, Audrey and I, with Hugh's letter, with Craig's account of the call, with the notes Audrey had prepared about the pattern of behavior. The officer who took our statement was a woman about Claire's age, patient and thorough. She explained that what I was describing, the financial inquiries, the capacity narrative, the contact with my appointed POA, constituted a pattern consistent with elder financial abuse, and that it was taken seriously in Ontario. They opened a file. What happened over the following 3 months? I won't detail in full because parts of it are still before the courts. What I will tell you is this. Bryce had done similar groundwork once before. His first wife's father in Kitchener, an elderly man with no other family nearby. That situation had been settled quietly, without charges, because the man didn't know what was happening until it was already halfway done. He lost a significant amount of his savings. Bryce walked away clean. He had not expected Hugh. He had not expected that my dying best friend would spend some of his last good months writing 12 pages on yellow legal paper, having careful conversations with careful people, and then instructing his solicitor to wait exactly 8 weeks so that I would be ready to hear it. I had to tell Claire. That was the hardest morning of my life, I think, and I've had some hard mornings. I drove to Hamilton, and I knocked on her door on a Saturday, which was unusual enough that she knew immediately something was wrong. I sat at her kitchen table, the table I'd helped her carry up the stairs the day she moved in, and I told her everything. She was silent for a long time. Then she started to cry. Then she stopped crying and got very still in the way she's done since she was a child, when she's making up her mind about something. She asked me if I believed she'd known. I told her the truth. I told her, no, I didn't believe that for a single second. And I don't. I never did. She left the house with 2 bags that afternoon. She moved into a friend's place. She called a lawyer the following week. Bryce was charged with attempted fraud and elder financial exploitation. He retained counsel and initially contested everything, which I'd been told to expect. But the Kitchener case had left a record, and once investigators started looking, the record grew. He pled guilty 4 months later to a reduced charge. He lost his professional certifications. The civil proceedings gave Claire grounds for divorce on terms that protected her from any financial claims he attempted to make. It took the better part of a year to untangle all of it. Craig came down from Guelph to help me with some of the paperwork. He stayed the weekend, and we watched the Leafs lose, which felt appropriate and almost comforting. Last spring, I had a new headstone installed at Hugh's grave in Oakville. The original was fine, but I wanted something from me. Something that acknowledged what he'd done. I had them add a line below his name and dates. It says, he kept watch. Claire comes to Barry most Sundays now. She brings food I don't need and coffee I do. She's doing well. She started running again, which she'd stopped somewhere in the middle of that marriage without quite noticing. She looks more like herself than she has in years. Last Sunday, she sat across from me at Eleanor's table and said, "Dad, how did he know? How did Hugh know before any of us?" I thought about that for a while before I answered. Hugh had spent 60 years paying attention to people. He'd worked alongside hundreds of men and women on job sites across this province, and he'd learned something about human nature that you can't learn from a book. He knew what a man looked like when he was looking at what wasn't his. He paid attention, I said. That's all. He just paid attention when the rest of us weren't. She nodded. She looked out the window at the backyard, at the bird feeder. I still fill every week because Eleanor started it and I can't seem to stop. I miss him, she said. So do I said. Every single day. I still have the 12 pages. I keep them in the drawer of my bedside table, in the same envelope with my name and Hugh's lopsided printing. I don't read them often, but I know they're there. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the snow is coming down the way it does in Barrie, straight and steady without wind, I think about the kind of friend who spends his last months watching out for you. Who doesn't make a fuss about it, who just quietly does what needs to be done and trusts you'll be ready when the time comes. I've tried to be worth that. I think that's all any of us can do in the end. Try to be worth the people who loved us well. I still think about the moment I sat in that conference room on Bay Street, reading Hugh's handwriting on yellow legal paper, and realized that a dying man had spent some of his last, clear-headed months watching out for me. Not asking for anything. Not making it about himself. Just quietly doing what needed to be done, and trusting me to be ready when the time came. There's a cause and effect to everything that happened. Bryce didn't fail because he got unlucky. He failed because what he was doing was wrong, and wrong things tend to leave traces. In records, in conversations, in the memories of people who pay attention. He'd done it before and walked away clean, and that near miss had made him careless. He believed that careful men are invisible. He never accounted for Hugh. Hugh was the most morally grounded person I've ever known. Not in the loud way. He never lectured anyone. But he had a standard he lived by. You don't take what isn't yours, you don't use people, and you don't look away when someone you love is being set up to be harmed. That standard cost him some of his remaining energy when he had precious little left to spend. He spent it anyway, because that's what integrity actually looks like when it's tested. It's not a principle you hold on to when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you something. And then there's what I had to find in myself after I read those 12 pages. I won't pretend I handled it perfectly. There were nights I wanted to call Claire immediately, to warn her, to protect her the fast and messy way. There were mornings I talked myself into believing I'd misunderstood, that maybe Bryce was just awkward around money, that Hugh had been reading too much into things. Grief does that. It makes you want the world to be simpler than it is. But I kept going back to Audrey. I kept asking the right questions. I kept building the kind of record that would actually help my daughter instead of just making me feel like I'd done something. That required more patience than I naturally have. It required thinking clearly when I wanted to react emotionally. I'm not saying I'm a particularly disciplined man. Eleanor would laugh at that, but I understood that Claire's future depended on me getting this right, not fast. That's the part no one tells you about protecting the people you love. It doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like sitting very still in a lawyer's office and asking boring questions about financial account flags and cooling off periods. Sometimes it looks like waiting 6 weeks when every instinct you have is screaming at you to move. Claire is running again. She looks like herself. She comes to Barrie on Sundays and we sit at the same table where her mother and I ate 30 years of meals together, and she talks about her week and I listen. That's enough. That's more than enough. I think about what Hugh gave me, not just the warning, but the example. A man who was running out of time chose to spend that time doing something useful for someone else. He didn't do it so I'd be grateful. He did it because it was right, And because he was the kind of person who couldn't do otherwise, that's the only real inheritance worth passing on, not property, not money. The simple, stubborn commitment to being someone people can count on, even when counting on them costs something. I'm trying to be worth that. I think that's all any of us can honestly do.